Well, thank you for joining us and a very warm welcome to the ANU Energy Update 2024 edition. My name is Frank Jotzo. I'm here in my role as Head of Energy with the Institute for Climate, Energy and Disaster Solutions. We acknowledge the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet, in our case, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, paying our respect to their old people, their leaders past, present and emerging, and of course to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here and online today. Now, of course, the world needs urgent action on climate change, more of it, deeper action, including, importantly, through transition of our energy systems and managing disaster risk as well. Fostering that low-carbon transition is a very high priority for many countries, including for Australia, and increasingly in the Asia-Pacific region as well. Now, as the national university at ANU, we tend to pay special attention to issues where research-based insights can help advance the interests of Australia and the region. We try to foster an open, well-informed conversation in the community, with governments, with civil society, with business. A meeting place of minds, if you will, a place for knowledge and ideas to emerge and percolate. And that's exactly the spirit that we like to take to these annual events, the updates. ANU famously has been described as a collection of many villages that each excel in different things. The Institute for Climate, Energy, Disaster Solutions helps link up the villages, integrate efforts, and support cross-disciplinary research. And in that, we draw on a long tradition, in fact, of ANU Institutes for Climate Change and Energy Change going back nearly 20 years now. Today's program this afternoon reflects this approach. We'll hear from energy researchers here at ANU, from policymakers, from industry representatives, and from civil society. We'll cover Australia's pathways to net zero emissions, and no doubt questions around the 2035 emissions target will enter the discussion as well. Questions of the regional transition will be one of our focus points, and as well, of course, the green industry opportunity and policies for green industry support. And we'll do so in a conversation in this room and in a conversation with everyone, the many hundreds joining us online as well. It's my great pleasure now to introduce our keynote speaker, the Honourable Matt Kean. He was appointed as chair of the Climate Change Authority, of course, just last month. Matt Kean previously served as the deputy leader of the New South Wales Liberal Party and as New South Wales Treasurer, as Minister for Energy and Environment, very importantly, as well as Minister in other portfolios. Please join me in welcoming Matt Kean.
Well, thank you, Frank, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Could I too begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Can I sincerely thank you, Frank, not only for the warm introduction, but for your outstanding advocacy and policy leadership in this very important area for a long period of time. You've set the benchmark when it comes to climate policy, and I continue to admire your work and look forward to working very closely together as we try and meet Australia's climate goals and our economic goals. Could I thank the university and the team behind the event for the invitation and the opportunity to speak here today. And of course, the spectrum of participants from research, government, business, and the community that are with us here today in person and online. The Australian National University's mission since its formation in 1946 has been focused on simple principles. You've always recognised the importance of promoting national unity and purpose in enhancing the nation's research capacity and the value of achieving Australia's full potential. The university's foundation was an expression of the nation's determination to lift itself from the ravages of World War II. Another emblem of the collective optimism that infused the post-war period commenced not far from here in 1949. The Snowy Hydro is a staggering achievement. It was pioneering in its scale, its engineering complexity, and its foresight, with the project continuing to deliver on-demand renewable energy today, 70 years later. Snowy Hydro has been a constant in the national grid, even as the energy mix around it continued to evolve. It is changing again today for two main reasons. The first is that coal-fired power stations are exiting the system. It is estimated that as much as 90% of the coal-fired generation that has underpinned our economy is coming to an end of its technical life by 2035. That's not a function of any decision of government. It's a simple reflection of the fact that this is old technology at the end of its technical life. So we need to get on with the job of replacing that capacity in the system. And it's obvious, both from the expert advice of the CSIRO and the clear view expressed by capital markets, that a system built on renewables is the best and most affordable way to do so. The second reason that our energy mix is changing is the need to decarbonise our economy to help combat climate change. Now, we're making good progress on transitioning the grid. That's clear from the latest annual progress report released by the Climate Change Authority in late 2023. The share of renewables in the electricity generation mix more than doubled in the past 7 years. They accounted for 32% of our electricity generated in 2022, and that was up from 14% in 2015. And more projects have continued to come online ever since. So we will update the data in the next progress report to be released before the end of the year, which should give us confidence in the path that we've chosen. But that optimism cannot cloud the fact that the targets Australia has set for itself in reducing our emissions are bold. A 43% reduction in emissions against the 2005 level by 2030, and net zero by 2050. As the Sector Pathway Review recently released by the authority points out, reducing emissions in other parts of the economy will be even more challenging. The emissions profile, abatement task, and precise solutions are arguably even more complex than the grid transformation that's already underway. And we know that that in itself is not easy either. What's clear is that we will get there. But the main game between now and 2030 needs to continue to be a focus on the electricity grid. Governments have mapped out what needs to be done. The Integrated System Plan gives us a clear national blueprint for the generation, storage, and transmission infrastructure needed to sustain a reliable, secure, and affordable national electricity market. Equivalent work is underway at the state level, including the Electricity Infrastructure Roadmap that I was proud to develop and champion in New South Wales. We will also depend on enabling initiatives such as the Capacity Investment Scheme, which is revolutionising our ability to encourage new generation in dispatchable renewable energy generation and storage. All these measures will combine to drive Australia towards the clean energy future that we wish to achieve. But in the meantime, we need to maximise the opportunity available from the infrastructure and technology that we already have in existence. Now, solar is an integral part of that story, as it should be for our sun-blessed country. In many ways, the mums and dads of Australia were pioneers in the clean energy revolution. One in 3 households now have rooftop solar. The Clean Energy Regulator forecasts that Australians are on track to install an additional 3 gigawatts of rooftop solar in 2024. And what we now need to do is also unlock smart, local solutions that allow us to capture and use that energy to support reliability and to drive down costs across the grid. It will also give more households greater incentive to install solar and battery technology that has made Australia a global leader. The second priority needs to be firming and battery storage solutions that improve reliability and continues to encourage investment in renewable generation projects. It's consistent with the mandate of the Capacity Investment Scheme. And success stories already exist. The Victorian Big Battery, located near Geelong, was commissioned in 2021. That battery can store enough energy to power over 1 million homes for 30 minutes. The Waratah Super Battery in New South Wales is even larger, and in fact, one of the largest batteries anywhere in the world. It can provide a guaranteed continuous active power capacity of at least 700 megawatts. But again, a crucial function of both these projects is their ability to unleash capacity and ease pressure on the existing network. They serve as a virtual transmission solution to help underpin a more reliable system. And that's ultimately what households and businesses want: affordable, secure, and clean energy. Using existing infrastructure in smarter ways will give us the headroom we need to deliver the transformational work required across the rest of the network and the broader economy. And that's what the Climate Authority is here to assist with: to provide robust, independent, expert advice to governments on how best to advance the energy transition and the broader transition across the economy. Our recent review focused on 5 additional sectors beyond energy and electricity, namely transport, industry and waste, agriculture and land, resources, and the built environment. They are each integral to our national wealth. The review identifies a spectrum of mature, demonstrated, and early-stage technologies that can best assist each sector. Let me give you an example. Both the power sector can transform itself to contribute to emissions reductions, but also position Australia to prosper economically in a low-carbon world. The industry and waste sector processes, manufactures, and produces goods essential to our economy and to our way of life, as well as disposing of materials that have reached their end of life. It accounts for 5% of the economy and generates over $140 billion in exports, but also consumes around 18% of Australia's energy. Emissions in the sector have begun to fall, albeit at a slower rate than other sectors. We understand that the task ahead is complex. The review identifies a mix of approaches that will be needed. These range from energy efficiency solutions to electrification and fuel switching, substitution of feedstock materials, and other initiatives. But if we can help erase technological constraints, remove planning barriers and supply chain constraints, and unlock a green premium for investors, the upside is pretty clear. We won't just improve our prospects of achieving net zero. We will also pave the way for a stronger future for industries, businesses, and employees right across the sector. We will produce both zero and low emissions materials essential to the domestic economy. And we can deliver low emissions goods and services such as green iron, steel, alumina, and aluminium that are in demand right across the globe. It will extend our rich tradition as an exporting nation in a way that underwrites prosperity for generations to come. Now, to achieve these goals in every sector, the report places a premium on eliminating the obstacles that could stymie progress. It provides a blueprint for legislative, regulatory, and policy solutions that can drive change and will help inform the net zero plan being developed by the Australian government. We need to give investors confidence. For example, that we're all working to build and maintain the social licence we need and rapidly address workforce shortages. One constant is the need to ensure that planning frameworks can enable and accelerate the transition. Government coordination is essential for effective community consultation and approval processes for major projects. The community deserves to be informed, have opportunities for genuine engagement and engagement and consultation, and see meaningful, lasting benefits. And at the same time, investors should have comfort that governments are working to overcome the complexities that add time and cost to the delivery. The authority does not seek to design the precise regulatory pathway that should apply. Rather, our goal is to promote the ideas and spark the debates that will lead to concrete action. The landmark report is backed by best-in-class modelling and informed by good ideas from across industry, the community, academia, and governments. That's core to the principle that will guide me as the chair of the Climate Authority, that we should lean into the science, evidence, engineering, and economics, not ideology. That we should acknowledge that the economic case for reducing our emissions is just as compelling as the environmental case, and that collaboration is essential to taking responsible and decisive action on climate change. They will also guide our forward work agenda. As the Climate Minister Chris Bowen said earlier this week, there's no point in emissions targets without a plan for achieving them. With our advice on sector pathways complete and the government's net zero plan well underway, we at the Climate Change Authority are turning our attention to our next major projects, independent expert and principal advice on Australia's progress and next emissions reduction targets. We have a mammoth nation-building task before us. It's one that dwarfs even the magnitude of what we first conceived and delivered not far from here almost 70 years ago. But we should approach it with the same confidence of those post-war pioneers. And when we succeed, we will give this nation clean, prosperous, and brighter, and a clean, prosperous, and brighter future we know is within reach. And I'm looking forward to working with each of you to achieve that ambition, to leave our planet to our kids better than we found it, and our economy to the generations to come more prosperous, stronger, and better than any generation has ever seen before. That's the chance we've got. We've got to grab it. There's nothing else more important. Thank you very much.
Matt Kean. Matt, can we start with your comments that you made about the way that the authority may operate now and in future, in terms of, I think you used the words, leaning into science, leaning into knowledge, and leading that conversation, not only about the science, but about economic opportunity in the transition. Tell us more about that.
Thank you. Well, I think the first principle is the Climate Change Authority should be the independent source of knowledge and truth in this debate. So our job is not to be the political actors. Our job is to set out the opportunities and the pathways for us to meet our obligations at law and internationally. So those obligations are clear. Both major political parties, or both sides of politics, have committed to net zero by 2050. So my job is to provide independent expert advice based on science, based on evidence and economics as to what those pathways look like. What is the best way for us to decarbonise in a way that supports our prosperity, supports our economy, creates jobs, drives investment? That's how we'll be approaching the challenge. We'll be giving frank and fearless advice to the government of the day based on evidence, science, and economics and engineering. That's my approach to the role.
And of course, there will be the inevitable and extremely important questions about policies and regulatory approaches to take to achieving that transition, not only the emissions reductions, but the holistic transition to net zero and low emission systems. Do you see that as an area for strengthening the effort, not only in government, but also in the independent institutions advising government?
I certainly do. I certainly think there's a role for an independent authority like ours to be pushing out there on the potential pathways to help us achieve our objectives. Right now, to 2030, we know the pathway to help us hit our 43% emissions reduction target. And that's the decarbonisation of the grid. That will do the bulk of the heavy lifting. We need to do it because our coal-fired power stations are coming out of the system. They're at end of life. This has nothing to do with climate change. This has everything to do with the fact these are old bits of kit that are running out of steam, literally. And I know that only too well as the Energy Minister in New South Wales. I think Vales Point is coming out of the system in around 2030. Bayswater is around 2033. Eraring has just been extended to 2027. And then you've got Mount Piper, the coal-fired power station, which is the youngest in the fleet. That is scheduled to close in 2038. But the coal supply to provide it with the feedstock that it needs to operate is dwindling very sharply. So we need to plan for the reality that that capacity is coming out of the system faster than anyone expected because of technical issues. And we need to replace that capacity in any case because we need to ensure system reliability. That's a non-negotiable for governments. The best way to do that is to deploy the technologies we already have available to us, which is wind, solar, backed up by firming, storage and transmission. That's what AEMO says. That's what all the experts say. That's what Capital's saying. And we need to get on with the job. And if we do replace the existing capacity that we have when it's scheduled to be replaced, as set out by the ISP, we'll largely hit our 43% emissions reduction target. When you're looking to 2035 and beyond, we're going to need to explore other pathways to accelerate. Now, we know that the current government has put in a number of pieces of architecture that are going to help us get to net zero in other parts of the economy. Take the safeguard mechanism, for example. That will help create the pathway for industry to decarbonise. But we know that there's a lot of work to do in the agriculture space. We know that there's a lot of work to do in the resources space. So I think there is a role for the authority to consider the facts, look at the technologies, look at what's happening around the world in international jurisdictions to provide advice to the government of the day, whatever political colour that should take on, and be in the public discussion, putting evidence-based policy out there, then the public can decide on in our election process. And that's what we'll be doing, Frank.
And we will, of course, have the opportunity to discuss in depth the authorities' report that was released just recently. We've got your CEO here on that panel. And of course, just briefly though, a key feature of that report that shows how Australia can get to net zero is remaining emissions, even at 2050 and below, that will be compensated, if you will, through carbon dioxide drawdown from the atmosphere, to a small extent in the projections in the report through technological means, through a large extent through carbon sequestration in the landscape. And of course, you've done big things in New South Wales in terms of creating new national parks and so forth. Would you comment on what we might expect in terms of the role of the land in decades to come?
Well, I think the land to do carbon offsets is going to provide a great opportunity for Australia. We've got a lot of it, that's the first thing, and we've got a lot of it that needs to be regenerated in any case. I've seen some commentators saying, oh, well, you know, Australia's going to have to do too much. You have to plant trees the equivalent of the size of Belgium. Well, let me put that into perspective. What the authority recommends is around 2 million hectares of tree plantings to help us get to net zero. We have around 37 million hectares of grasslands. We have tens of millions of hectares of cropping land. So this is a small drop in the ocean given Australia's land mass. So we can not only use our land as an advantage to help our industry to decarbonise, but we can also help the rest of the world decarbonise and create new revenue streams, new investment channels for our country in doing so. So we should be not looking at the challenges, but also looking at the opportunities for Australia to do its bit to save the planet, but also do our bit that will help us grow our economy. That's the chance, and we should be grabbing it, Frank.
Please indicate to me if you'd like to ask a question. We'll get the microphone to the gentleman here. Please, just while we're getting the microphone ready, I'll go to an online question. The online question is, where have I got it? Matt, the CCA had identified constraints in supply chains for important low emissions technologies as a barrier to Australia's net zero pathway. What role can local content requirements play in addressing this barrier and access to the key decarb technologies, goes the online question.
Well, I think it can play a role, and the federal government has recognised that. That's why it's set up its Future Made in Australia plan. That's why it's got its National Reconstruction Fund. So clearly they're identifying the opportunity for us to provide some of the elements of the supply chain. But Frank, I'm a free markets kind of guy. I believe in international trade, and I look at some countries around the world that are very well qualified to provide a lot of these technologies. They're doing it at scale and doing it in a way that's bringing them down the cost curve. I mean, look at the dramatic falls in wind technology, battery technology, solar technology. Now, there's a case, a very strong case for making sure that we, manage our sovereignty and security issues. But there's also a very strong case that we take advantage of international cooperation and trade, and we focus on the things where we have a natural advantage in, and take advantage of those countries that may have a natural advantage in other things for the benefit of Australian consumers. So I'm not a protectionist. I don't think we should be going down that path. I think we should be focusing on the areas where we can make a difference, where we will have a natural competitive advantage, but also work with other countries that may have competitive advantages in other areas to lower the cost of energy here. And we know that more wind, more solar, more battery technology into our electricity system will do the right thing for the environment, but importantly, it will put downward pressure on electricity bills today. People talking about technology solutions in 20 years' time are not going to help people with the crippling prices of energy that is happening right now. We know what will help families right now, and that's more supply into the system, more firmed up supply into the system. There's not a problem, prices aren't high on your electricity bills because we have too many renewables in the system. Prices are high because we don't have enough renewables in the system. So the Sector Pathways report that we recently released sets out a plan to help us decarbonise our economy, help us decarbonise our electricity system, and in doing so, we can put huge downward pressure on electricity bills. So let's get the ideology out of the debate. Let's get the economics and the engineering into the debate on energy transition. And that means cracking on with the job of rolling out wind, solar, and firming technologies with transmission at scale today. And the point I made in the speech was that stuff is underway, it's happening, but there are other opportunities that can speed up the transition without transmission. And think of behind the meter solutions. Think of what we can do to bring more rooftop solar, that capacity that we've got in the grid to help us manage this transition in an orderly fashion and a cheaper fashion. Behind the meter solutions, front of the meter solutions like community batteries will help us manage this in the lowest cost possible. I looked at some data recently that shows that if you've got community batteries, behind the meter batteries, you can unlock another 7 gigawatts of capacity in the NEM today if there are some rule changes, system changes, policy changes. That additional 7 gigawatts is the equivalent of 3/4 of the coal-fired power stations that power New South Wales. So by using what we already have and sweating that a bit harder, that will help us buy a bit more time to bring the utility scale stuff on and also set us up for a very ambitious target in 2035.
Yeah. Question over.
Rod Holsgrove, I had a long interest in climate change. Just on carbon drawdown, I've been encouraging the government to strategise this in a more obvious way. I don't think they have. I don't know whether Frank or Matt could comment on it. You may not be able to, Matt, but I think there may be, it seems to me still there may be a need for a more transparent drawdown policy. I don't hear much from the government on that aspect. And the other thing which I'd be grateful for your clarification, Matt, can the authority actually, with temperatures rising perhaps faster than we anticipate, can the authority comment on the targets, or is that outside your policy frame? Is that more area of government? Can you, on the 2050 target, is that something you can comment? Can the authority comment do reports on, or is that not in your bailiwick?
Well, Rod, we can comment, and it's very much in my bailiwick. In fact, it's a statutory obligation of the Climate Change Authority to make recommendations to the government of the day as to what our NDC will need to be for 2035 and beyond. That is in the work program. I can't announce it here today. I'd love to give you an exclusive, but we're not going to do that right here because we've got to do the work, Rod. We've got to make sure that we've got the right scientific evidence that shows us that Australia is doing its bit to meet our international obligations. But we also need to make sure that what we're proposing is going to be achievable from an engineering and economic perspective. So we've got the CSIRO doing a comprehensive body of work that will inform the authority on the advice that we're going to recommend to the government. We'll look to do that as soon as the work is ready, which will likely be in the new year. So we're currently undertaking that process. Brad and his team, I've given him half an hour off to come to this function, and he's then going to go back and keep cracking away on the work that we need to do. But let me assure you, it will be independent, it will be ambitious, it will be science aligned, but it will also focus on being achievable. They're the principles that will underline the recommendations that we will make. With regard to the first bit of your question, I think the obvious answer there is there's the safeguard mechanism in place that's driving the demand for ACCUs or credits and also underpinning the supply side. That policy has been in place for some time. It's very clear what those settings are. And companies can either change their practices or they can buy offsets. One thing I will say is that we need to have robust integrity around those carbon units. They actually need to be doing what they're purporting to do, and that's offset carbon. ERAC is doing very important work at the moment to ensure that those offsets, those pathways have integrity so that we can all have confidence that when those credits are being offered up, they're doing what they're intended to do, and that's offset carbon.
I think 2035 target advice will be one of the most hotly awaited documents in months to come.
Yeah, I'm not feeling the pressure at all.
No, that's right. Matt, if it's okay, we'll keep you 3-4 more minutes.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, good question here.
Bill Herditch from MacDoc Ag Group.
That's all right. I can hear you.
Just a question about the drawdown again. One of the issues in the review of the paper is competition for land and the potential social rest. And in our group, we've been doing a lot of work on regenerative. In our group, we've been doing a lot of work on regenerative agriculture and trying to sort of get win-wins across the landscape where you've got active farm management for vegetation, remnant vegetation, but also soil carbon, livestock emission reductions and a whole range of other opportunities. And I understand that the government's sort of decarbonisation land and ag plan is going to address that. But does the authority believe there's a sort of a win-win here rather than sort of just sort of planting and leaving, but engaging rural communities? We've got 400 million hectares of grazing land out there. We're not going to put it all down to trees and walk away from it. We need to be able to engage and do that work.
No, absolutely. And it was very disappointing to see a number of falsehoods and lies being pushed out in the public domain around the sector plan's recommendations. And one of the more outrageous and ridiculous comments was from media outlets and some politicians who said that we were suggesting people not to eat meat. That wasn't the case at all. The sector pathways report clearly showed that livestock would continue to grow here in Australia. And we're not in the business of telling people what they can eat. And we're not in the business of telling people what they can do with their land. We are in the business of putting forward recommendations about how Australia can meet its international commitments, how Australia can meet its domestic legislated commitments, and we'll do so based on science, based on evidence. But of course, that means we need to work with stakeholders. Of course, that means we need to engage with rural and regional Australia and our farming sector, just like we need to engage with industry when formulating our plans. We're not going to put these things forward in isolation. We want stakeholder engagement and buy-in. So we'll work closely with our farming communities. As you know, we've got Fiona Simpson on the CCA board, and I'm looking forward to working with groups like yours to ensure that we get this right. We bring the community with us, because it's in all of our interest that we work together, that we collaborate. This is a nation-building project. If we get it right, as I said, we can leave our environment to our kids better than we found it, and we can leave our economy to them stronger and more prosperous than any generation has ever seen before.
We'll end on a question from online. There's many questions online that are being fed here. One is about nuclear.
Oh yeah.
The other one that I'll actually ask you. You can respond to the nuclear question. The one I'll read out is from Joe Oddy. Hi, Matt. Thanks for being the chair of CCA. Thinking about a bigger picture than just Australia's energy transition and carbon emissions reduction, how do you see your work at the CCA influence, guide, and lead energy transition policy and practice for other high-emitting countries? Is there some function that we can play, right? Showing innovative solutions that might apply in other countries?
Well, I think so. And I think we've touched on it in my speech and in one of the questions that we just had. And that's with regard to using some of the technologies where we have an advantage in, or we're leading on, and demonstrating how other countries can do that. And I point to rooftop solar. We've got the highest penetration of rooftop solar anywhere in the world. And we can harness that to help ensure that we not only manage the transition of the electricity system, but we do so in a way that lowers household bills, maintains system reliability, and underpins the transition of other parts of the economy. I mean, you transition the electricity system, and then you set yourselves up to transition other parts of the economy that hang off the electricity system. Think transport, think industry, a whole range of other parts of the economy. So I think there is the perfect example in how we utilize the high penetration of rooftop solar and integrate that into the broader system or broader economy, where we're front leading, and we can show the rest of the world how it can be done. So that's one example that I hope that we'll be able to benefit other countries. But just like we're leading in that area, so too should we be looking at other jurisdictions around the world for what they're doing and see if that's applicable for us. So one of the things I'm looking forward to in the coming months is going to COP. I'll be meeting with the other chairs of the CCA equivalent to be not only building relationships, but also sharing knowledge, sharing policy ideas, making sure that we are in the discussion and getting the best and brightest ideas to help form our views, setting our country up for success. So we've got an important role to play, and I'm looking forward to being part of it.
Matt Kean, thank you very much for sharing your insights and ideas, and all the best in this important job.
Thanks, Frank.